The Grand Synod of the Ethel Guardian Dominion did not tolerate silence well. In the vast, crystalline amphitheater where the voices of 1,000 subject systems usually wove a tapestry of bureaucratic harmony and political maneuvering, silence was a predator. It was the heavy, suffocating absence of data, the void where certainty should have been. High Exarch Valen felt the chill of it seep through his ceremonial robes, settling into the marrow of his old bones as he stared up at the holographic projection dominating the center of the chamber. It was a sphere of absolute darkness, a cartographic null zone that the Dominion's stellar charts had labeled simply as Sector Zero, but which the superstitious navigators of the merchant guilds whispered of as the Silent Void. The projection was live, fed by the quantum entanglement buoys that lined the perimeter of that forbidden region, and for the first time in 10,000 cycles of recorded history, the perimeter had been breached. The Dominion, in its hubris, in its unquenchable thirst for resource expansion, and the arrogance of a civilization that had never known a true peer, had sent the Grand Armada into the dark. Lord Commander Calith, a being of towering height and iridescent scales that shimmered with the aggression of his caste, stood at the dais, his claws gripping the podium with enough force to fracture the obsidian surface. He was the architect of this incursion, the one who had argued before the Synod that the species inhabiting Sector Zero, these humans, were nothing more than isolationist primitives, hiding in the dark because they feared the light of superior civilizations. He had spoken of rare isotopes, of unclaimed garden worlds, of a galaxy that belonged by right to the strong. He had rallied the fleets, pushed past the warning buoys that broadcast a single, looping message in every known mathematical constant, and ordered the advance. That was 3 standard hours ago. The fleet, a majestic assembly of dreadnoughts and cruisers that had subjugated star systems from the core to the rim, had crossed the threshold. And then the silence had fallen. Not the static of jamming, nor the chaotic noise of battle, but a sudden, absolute cessation of existence. Valen watched the telemetry streams. They were flat lines. Every biological monitor on the cruise, every reactor signature, every warp field harmonic, gone in a microsecond. It was as if the universe had simply ceased to exist past that invisible demarcation line. The whispers in the Synod chamber grew louder, a rising tide of panic masked as indignation. Delegates from the aquatic worlds of the Hydrax adjusted their environmental suits nervously, while the insectoid representatives of the Klaxian hive mind chattered their mandibles in a discordant rhythm of distress. Calith turned to the assembly, his voice booming, though Valen could detect the tremor of uncertainty beneath the bravado. He spoke of atmospheric interference, of a new type of nebula that blocked sensors, of a momentary glitch in the relay network. He was lying, or perhaps he was simply deluding himself, unable to process a reality where the might of the Ethel Guardian Dominion could be extinguished like a candle in a gale. Valen closed his 3 primary eyes for a moment, letting the sensory overload of the chamber wash over him, remembering the ancient texts he had studied in the archives of the first founders, texts that predated the Dominion itself, texts that spoke of a time when the galaxy was younger and far more dangerous, and of a species that had not been conquered but had chosen to withdraw. The warning buoys had not been threats. That was the terrible realization blooming in Valen's mind, a cold flower of understanding. The messages broadcast in binary, in prime number sequences, in geometric diagrams had not been "keep out or we will destroy you." They had been "do not enter for your own safety." There is a profound difference between a fortress and a quarantine zone, and the Dominion, in its blindness, had mistaken the latter for the former. The silence stretched on, becoming a physical weight, pressing against the force fields that kept the vacuum of space at bay outside the station's transparent dome. And then the sensors screamed. It was not a sound, but a data spike so intense it overloaded the neural interfaces of the drone servitors monitoring the consoles. The holographic projection shifted, the black sphere of Sector Zero rippling as if something massive was pushing through the fabric of spacetime itself. It was not the return of the Grand Armada. The signal signatures were wrong. These were not the elegant, sweeping curves of Ethel Guardian energy waves, nor the jagged, aggressive pulses of the Klaxian fleets. These signatures were mathematically perfect, terrifyingly stable and dense, so incredibly dense that the station's gravity sensors registered the approaching vessels as stellar mass objects. They were not warping in, they were not using hyperlanes. They were folding the universe around them, compressing distance into irrelevance. The main view screen, a kilometer-wide pane of diamond glass, darkened as the stars were blotted out. They arrived without a flash, without the thunderclap of displaced particles, One moment there was empty space, the next there was steel. The human ships were not beautiful. They possessed none of the organic flow of the Dominion's aesthetic, none of the gilded ornamentation that signified status and history. They were brutalist monuments of gray and black, geometric shapes of impossible scale, cubes, rectangles, monoliths that absorbed the light of the local star and gave nothing back. The largest of them, a rectangular slab the size of a small moon, positioned itself directly above the celestial spire, casting a shadow that plunged the entire council chamber into twilight. The silence in the hall was no longer one of uncertainty. It was the silence of prey that realizes the predator is not hunting, but merely observing. Valen looked at the readings scrolling on his personal datapad. The energy output of that single vessel exceeded the total power generation of the Dominion's core worlds. It was a harness on a star, a cage for physics itself. "Shields up," Calith roared, his voice cracking, the instinct for war overriding the paralysis of awe. "Target their weapon systems, fire everything." But the weapon systems of the station did not respond. The station's AI, a synthetic intelligence of vast complexity, had locked itself down. A message flashed on every screen in the chamber, on every datapad, on the neural retinals of every delegate. It was not in the trade tongue of the Dominion. It was not in the binary of the machines. It was a direct conceptual transfer, a thought placed into their minds with surgical precision. Cease. It was not a command. It was a statement of fact. The weapons were not offline. They simply ceased to be relevant. The power coursing through the human ship was dampening the strong nuclear force within the station's weapon capacitors. They had turned the ammunition of the Dominion into inert matter with a thought. A beam of light, solid and shimmering, descended from the monolith, piercing the station's shields as if they were mist. It struck the center of the amphitheater, widening into a pillar of white luminescence. There was no sound of transport, no dissolving of matter. Two figures simply walked out of the light. They were bipedal, unarmored, wearing simple suits of a dark, matte fabric that seemed to absorb the ambient light. They were small compared to the towering Calith, fragile compared to the armored carapaces of the Klaxians. But they walked with a terrifying calmness, a lack of fear that was more unnerving than any weapon. The leader, a human with silver hair and eyes that looked like shattered flint, stepped up to the dais where Calith stood frozen. The human did not look at the war leader. He looked past him, scanning the terrified faces of the Synod, his gaze finally resting on Valen. "I am Admiral Julian Voss of the Terran Stewardship," the human said. His voice was not amplified, yet it carried to the furthest reaches of the hall, mediated by some invisible acoustic technology. He spoke the high tongue of the Ethelgard flawlessly, with an accent that sounded ancient, like the grinding of tectonic plates. "You have breached the veil of silence. You have ignored the warnings. You have entered human space." He paused, and in that pause, the weight of the galaxy seemed to shift. "We are not here to retaliate. Retaliation implies a conflict between equals. We are here because you have broken something you do not understand, and now we must assess the damage." Calith, regaining a shred of his pride, snarled, his hand reaching for the ceremonial plasma blade at his hip. "You destroyed my fleet. You slaughtered millions." Admiral Voss turned his head slowly, looking at the war leader with a mixture of pity and weariness. "Your fleet is not destroyed," Voss said softly. "They are in stasis. We caught them before they could cross the event horizon of the anomaly we guard. They are frozen in the instant between life and death, preserved until we can determine if it is safe to release them. But you have forced our hand." Voss tapped a device on his wrist, and the air above the dais shimmered. A holographic display appeared, but it was unlike any map the Dominion had ever seen. It showed the galaxy, but overlaid upon it was a web of red lines, fractures in the fabric of reality, all converging on the sector the humans occupied. "You call this Sector 0, Voss continued, addressing the silent hall. "You think we hide here because we are afraid of you. You think we are isolationists hoarding resources." He gestured to the red fractures. "We are not hiding. We are holding the door shut." The realization hit Valen with the force of a physical blow. The gravity of the situation began to dawn on the assembly. The humans were not hiding from the galaxy. They were hiding the galaxy from something else. The human space was not a territory. It was a containment facility. 11,000 years ago, Voss said, his voice taking on a rhythmic storytelling cadence that spellbound the terrified audience, humanity reached the apex of technological ascension. We unlocked the secrets of zeropen energy. We mastered biological immortality. We folded space like origami. We thought we were gods. He walked down the steps of the dais, the alien delegates parting before him like water. But in our ascension we made a noise, a metaphysical scream that echoed through the subdimensions, and something heard us. The room was so quiet that the hum of the station's air recyclers sounded like a roar. We call them the entropy swarm. They are not a species. They are a correction mechanism of the universe, a reaction to the violation of thermodynamic laws. They feed on complexity. They feed on civilization. They arrived and they consumed our outer colonies in days. Stars were snuffed out. Reality unraveled. Voss stopped in front of Valen, locking eyes with the old exarch. We realized that we could not defeat them with force. The more energy we used, the stronger they became. So we made a choice. We sacrificed our place in the galaxy. We retreated to this sector and we built the Veil. We used our own civilization as bait, anchoring the swarm here, trapping them in a loop of time and gravity, a perpetual stalemate where we fight the same battle every second of every day, so that the rest of you, the young races, the loud races, could live. The silence that followed was different now. It was the silence of shame. Calith slumped against the podium, his aggression drained away, replaced by a horrifying comprehension of his own insignificance. The Dominion had prided itself on being the guardians of order, the masters of the stars. And all the while, the humans had been there in the dark, holding back the end of time. "But you entered," Voss said, his voice hardening. "Your fleet's warp signatures disrupted the containment field. The frequency of your drives resonated with the swarm's hunger. You woke them up." The Admiral turned back to the center of the room. "The stasis on your fleet is the only thing keeping the swarm from using your ships as a bridge to the rest of the galaxy. If we release them, the swarm follows. If we destroy them, the release of energy feeds the swarm." "Then what is to be done?" Valen asked, his voice trembling. "If we have doomed ourselves, tell us, do not mock us with explanations." Voss looked at the old alien with a softness that was unexpected. "We do not mock, we educate. You have broken the seal, and now you must help us repair it. You wanted to enter human space. Congratulations, you are now part of the stewardship." The Admiral gestured to the monolith above. "The Aegis is not a warship, it is a loom. It weaves gravity. We need to expand the Veil. We need to encompass your border systems. We need to pull your frontier into the quarantine zone before the swarm escapes." The uproar was immediate. "Annexation," screamed a delegate from the merchant guilds. "You cannot simply take our worlds." Voss did not shout. He simply projected an image into the air, a live feed from the edge of the quarantine zone. It showed one of the Dominion's scout ships that had lingered too close to the rift. It was unraveling. The metal was turning into dust, the energy bleeding away into violet smoke, and the crew were not dying. They were becoming less. Their complexity was being stripped away, reverting to biological sludge, then to basic organic compounds, then to nothing. It was a horror beyond comprehension. "This is not a negotiation," Voss said. "This is a rescue. The swarm is already leaking through the microfractures your fleet created. We have calculated the rate of decay. We have 48 standard hours before the cascade failure reaches this station." The reality of the too late in the title of their situation settled upon the Synod. They had forced their way into the Forbidden Garden, only to find it was a prison for demons. And now they were in the cell with the jailers. "We will require total command authority over your energy grids," the second human spoke for the first time. She was younger, sharp-featured, holding a tablet that seemed to be interfacing with the station's mainframe despite the lack of any physical connection. "We need to synchronize your reactor outputs with the Aegis to create a harmonic barrier. Your technology is primitive, but it has mass. We can use it as ballast." Calith looked up, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "You ask us to surrender our sovereignty, to become tools?" Voss nodded slowly. "I ask you to grow up. Today, right now, you have. Played at Empire long enough. You wanted to be a great power. A great power protects. A great power sacrifices. We have sacrificed our history, our culture, our connection to the universe for 11,000 years. Now it is your turn to carry a fraction of that weight." The Admiral stepped closer to the center, his presence commanding the room. "The barrier we will create will isolate this sector for a century. No ships in, no ships out. Your economy will collapse. Your political alliances will shatter. You will be alone in the dark with us." "And if we refuse?" Valen asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we will withdraw the Aegis to the secondary containment line," Voss said simply. "We will seal the breach from the other side, and this station, along with your fleet and the 12 inhabited systems in this cluster, will be consumed by the swarm. We will mourn you, as we have mourned thousands of other species that failed the Great Filter, but we will not let you take the rest of the galaxy with you." The choice was not a choice. It was an ultimatum delivered by gods who were tired of being gods. Valen stood up, his joints popping, his age heavy upon him. He looked at Calith, who was staring at the floor, defeated. He looked at the squabbling delegates, who were now silent, waiting for leadership. We submit, Valen said, his voice echoing in the chamber. The High Synod accepts the authority of the Terran stewardship. Voss nodded, no triumph in his eyes, only relief. Then let us begin. There is much work to do, and the noise of your fear is attracting them. The transition was abrupt. The humans did not waste time with ceremonies. The Aegis lowered itself further, physically docking with the delicate spires of the station, a brutal intrusion of function over form. Teams of human engineers flooded the station. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, stripping away ornamental plating to access power conduits, bypassing safety protocols that the Dominion held sacred, rewiring the very heart of the station. They ignored the aliens, stepping around them as one would step around furniture, focused entirely on the data streams flowing across their visors. Valen found himself standing next to Admiral Voss on the observation deck, watching the operation. The view outside was changing. The stars were disappearing one by one as the Aegis began to deploy the containment field. It looked like a curtain of liquid obsidian being drawn across the sky. They are frightened, Valen said, gesturing to his people. They believe you are conquerors. We are janitors, Voss replied, his gaze fixed on the darkness. We clean up the messes of physics. It is a thankless job. Why, Valen asked. Why save us? You could have let us die. It would have been safer for you, less variable. Voss turned to him, and for the first time Valen saw a glimmer of the humanity that lay beneath the cold logic. Because we were you once, arrogant, loud, certain that the universe was ours for the taking. We looked into the abyss and we blinked. We don't want you to blink. He pointed to the view screen where a ripple of violet light distorted the blackness, the first tendril of the swarm probing the new breach. Look. The view zoomed in. The violet light was not energy. It was a swarm of millions of entities, shifting impossible shapes that defied geometry. They clawed at the fabric of space, eating the vacuum. And then a squadron of human drone fighters launched from the Aegis. They were silent, unmanned, moving at speeds that turned the pilots into jelly. They didn't fire lasers. They fired singularities, miniature black holes that collapsed the space the swarm occupied, tearing them apart with tidal forces. It was a ballet of destruction, a war fought with the fundamental constants of the universe. We fight this every day, Voss whispered. For 11,000 years, do you understand now? The human space isn't a territory, it's a shield wall. The realization settled deep in Valen's soul. The anger he had felt at the invasion, the fear of the unknown, it all evaporated, replaced by a profound, crushing humility. The Dominion had been playing with toy soldiers while the humans had been holding back the apocalypse. We did not know, Valen murmured. No species ever does, Voss said. Until it's too late, but you are the first to survive the realization. The hours that followed were a blur of organized chaos. The Dominion's fleet, the pride of their civilization, was repurposed. Human engineers boarded the dreadnoughts, stripping out the weapons and replacing them with emitter arrays. The proud captains of the Ethel Guardian Navy wept as their ships were gutted, but they obeyed. They had seen the violet light. They had seen the nothingness that followed it. Calith, the war leader, was put to work hauling coolant canisters alongside a human technician. There was no rank in the face of extinction. As he deadline approached, the vibration in the station grew intense. The Aegis was drawing so much power that the lights flickered and died, leaving the station illuminated only by the emergency strobes and the eerie glow of the containment field. Voss stood at the central console, his hands moving across the interface like a pianist. Initiating harmonic lock, he announced. Synchronizing with Dominion reactors. Pulse in 3, 2, 1. A soundless concussion wave passed through the station. It was a psychic pressure, a feeling of being compressed, squeezed into a tiny point, and then released. Outside, the curtain of darkness slammed shut. The violet light was cut off, severed from its source. The breach was sealed, but the cost was visible. The stars were gone, all of them. The station, the fleet, and the 12 systems were now encased in a bubble of artificial spacetime, cut off from the rest of the universe. It is done, Voss said, slumping against the console, sweat dripping from his forehead. The quarantine is established. Valen looked out at the absolute blackness. For a century, he asked. At minimum, Voss replied. It will take that long for the swarm to lose interest, for the scent of your breach to fade. Until then, you are with us. The silence returned to the chamber, but it was not the silence of fear, nor the silence of arrogance. It was the silence of a library or a cathedral, a heavy, respectful silence. The delegates looked at the humans with new eyes. They were no longer the mysterious primitives or the terrifying invaders. They were the atlases of the galaxy, carrying the sky on their shoulders. "We will have to restructure our society," Valen said, his mind already racing with the logistics. "Our economy was based on expansion. Our culture was based on conquest." "You will find new things to value," Voss said, wiping his brow. "Art, philosophy, science, you have 100 years of quiet, use it. You'd be surprised what a species can achieve when it stops trying to own everything it sees." Calith approached the dais. He looked stripped down raw. "And what of us?" he asked Voss. "Are we prisoners or soldiers?" "You are students," Voss said. "We have held this line alone for too long. We are tired. If you learn well, if you can master your fear and your ego, perhaps one day you can take a shift on the wall. We could use the help." The offer hung in the air, immense and terrifying, to join the stewardship, to become the guardians of the dark. It was a destiny far greater and far heavier than any empire the Dominion had ever dreamed of building. Days turned into weeks within the bubble. The shock of isolation began to fade, replaced by a grim determination. The humans shared their technology, not weapons but infrastructure. They taught the Ethel Guardians how to build zero-point reactors, how to recycle matter with 100% efficiency, how to stabilize planetary cores. The cultural exchange was painful but necessary. The humans were blunt, logical, and intolerant of political posturing. They tore down the bureaucratic labyrinths of the Synod and replaced them with meritocratic councils. They did not rule, they guided, with the heavy hand of a parent who knows the stove is hot. Valen spent much of his time with Voss. He learned of Earth, a blue marble lost to legend, preserved only in the memory banks of the Aegis. He learned of the wars humanity had fought before the Ascension, of the mistakes they had made. "We were just like you," Voss told him one evening as they watched the readouts of the containment wall. "We thought we were the center of the story. It took the swarm to show us we were just a footnote, a very stubborn footnote, but a footnote nonetheless." One cycle, a crisis emerged. A faction of the Klaxian hive mind, driven mad by the isolation, attempted to sabotage the containment field emitters on one of the outer worlds. They believed that if they lowered the wall, they could flee into the warp. It was a suicide pact born of claustrophobia. Calith, who had been training with the human security forces, led the response. He did not go in with plasma cannons blazing. He went in with the suppression shields and the non-lethal neural disruptors the humans had given them. He subdued the rebellion without a single casualty. When he returned to the station, Voss was waiting for him. "You didn't kill them," Voss noted, a hint of approval in his voice. "Dead men cannot learn," Calith grunted, repeating a phrase Voss had used weeks ago. "And we cannot afford to lose the biomass." Voss smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "You are learning. Violence is a failure of imagination." The transformation of the Dominion was slow, agonizing, but undeniable. The fear of the human space had been replaced by a reverence for it. The Forbidden Zone was not a place of death. It was a sanctuary. The aliens began to understand the too late in a new light. It was too late to be conk. Urers, it was too late to be ignorant. They had crossed the threshold of maturity, dragged kicking and screaming by a species that had already paid the price. Months later, a signal was detected. Not from the outside, but from deep within the human sector, from the core of the containment zone where the Aegis had come from. It was a pulse, rhythmic and complex. Voss stood in the command center, his face pale. "Is it the swarm?" Valen asked, his heart hammering. "No," Voss said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's the beacon, it's the signal we've been waiting for 11,000 years." He brought it up on the main screen. It was a message from the other side of the galaxy, from a region that had been silent since the Ascension. It was a human code. "Survivors?" Calith asked. "No," Voss said, tears forming in his eyes. "A cure." The data stream was massive. It contained equations, schematics, a roadmap to a physics that could reverse the entropy of the swarm. It was not a weapon to kill them. It was a way to heal the tear in reality that allowed them to exist. The humans had not just been holding the line. They had been running a simulation, a calculation the size of a galaxy, waiting for the solution to process. And the arrival of the Dominion fleet, the fresh influx of chaotic variables, had inadvertently provided the missing integer. "You," Voss looked at Valen, laughing, a sound of pure release. "Your chaotic, stupid, arrogant invasion, it introduced a random variable into the stasis equation. You broke the loop. You solved it." The irony was staggering. The Dominion's blunder, their trespass, had been the key. They hadn't just doomed themselves to the cage, they had accidentally unlocked the door. "What does this mean?" Valen asked, daring to hope. "It means we don't have to hold the wall forever," Voss said, his hands flying across the controls. "It means we can push back, we can fix the sky." The preparations for the counteroffensive, or rather the Great Repair, began immediately. It would not be a war of destruction, but of creation. The combined fleets of the Dominion and the Stewardship, armed with the new physics, would move into the swarm territories. They would not fire missiles, they would fire reality-stabilizing anchors. They would stitch the universe back together. On the eve of the departure, Valen stood with Voss on the observation deck. The Aegis was humming with a new energy, a golden light that seemed to sing. "We entered your space," Valen said, reflecting on the journey. "We thought we were entering a graveyard, we thought it was too late for us." "It was too late for the empire you were," Voss corrected. "But it was just in time for the civilization you are becoming." The finally get it moment had arrived. The galaxy wasn't a prize to be won. It was a garden to be tended. And the walls weren't there to keep people out, they were there to keep the weeds from choking the life. "Ready the fleet," Admiral Voss commanded, his voice ringing out to a crew of humans, Ethel Guardians, Klaxians, and Hydrax, all wearing the insignia of the Stewardship. "Drop the containment field, open the door." "Let's go say hello," Kalith added, a grim smile on his scaled face. As the field dropped and the violet abyss of the swarm became visible, the combined fleet did not flinch. They surged forward, a spear of light into the darkness, no longer afraid of the silence, for they brought the music of a united galaxy with them. The Dominion had entered human space, and they would never leave it, not because they were prisoners, but because they were finally, truly home. They finally got it. The humans weren't the monsters in the dark. They were the fire that kept the dark at bay. And now the fire was spreading. The end of the silence had begun. The age of the Stewardship was over. The age of the Reclamation had begun. And deep in the archives of the High Synod, a new entry was written, replacing the warnings of the past. It read simply, "Sector 0, the Crucible. Enter only if you are ready to carry the weight of the world." The fleet jumped, the darkness shattered, and the universe, for the first time in eons, took a breath.